The elections are less than 2 months away, and top governors, senators, and congressmen are focused on getting their party's presidential candidate elected on November 3rd. But Mother Nature has other plans and is forcing many of them to turn their attention towards the wildfires ravaging the West. Typical partisan bickering isn't going to solve this national issue. Case in point, our next guest, actually, the air quality in Portland, Oregon, so bad that he says you can't breathe, and his kids haven't set foot outside in a week. Joining us now is Ryan Haugo, who's the Director of Conservation Science for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. And Ryan, I just want to start off with conditions on the ground. I know that you live in Portland, Oregon. How is the air quality outside your home, and how bad are the wildfires in the state?
Well, thanks, Abel. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. And as you say, we have had, it's been a really tough several weeks here in Oregon. Currently, the air outside my house is rated as unhealthy. As you said, we've been between unhealthy and hazardous for all of, the last week and a half. My kids haven't been outside for a week. But I want to acknowledge what I'm experiencing here in Portland. Across Oregon, California, Washington, we've just had extraordinary wildfire activity driven by drought, heat, high winds, and again, just my heart goes out to the many people who lives have been lost, people are missing, tens of thousands of people have evacuated their homes. And so while the air that we're trying to breathe is pretty tough, I just want to acknowledge many people are really struggling right now.
Yes, absolutely. And you've actually done a study where you've looked at how different communities have different vulnerabilities to wildfires. And I wanted to focus on communities of color, particularly when it comes to Blacks and Native Americans. Now, what have you found in terms of how vulnerable they are, more vulnerable in terms of their counterparts? And are you just talking about property, or are you also talking about loss of lives?
Yeah, so in the study that you're referring to, we approach this from the idea that disasters are not natural, and that while the physical hazards we face, like fires, floods, and storms, have a natural origin, disasters themselves are human-caused, and then vulnerability to disasters is caused by social, political, and economic processes as much as natural and physical hazards themselves. So in the study that we're referring to that we published in 2018 in partnership with the University of Washington, we used an index of what we called adaptive capacity. And that was using factors related to demographics, housing, transportation, language education, socioeconomic status to reflect the ability for communities to absorb and adjust to disturbances like fire while minimizing the damage to life, property, services, the ability to recover after a fire has come through. And what we found is when we looked at this vulnerability across the United States, this was a national study, more than 29 million Americans, many of whom who are white and economically secure, live in areas that have significant potential for extreme wildfires. But within that, there are more than 12 million people who are considered socially vulnerable to wildfires. And an extreme fire event could be devastating. And so when we, again, look at those communities that are exposed to wildfire, communities that are mostly Black, Latinx, or Native American, they experience 50% greater vulnerability to wildfire than other communities, meaning that they will have much more difficulty both responding to and recovering from a disturbance like fire.
I want to dive into the recovering from part of this. And we have talked a number of times about different environmental racism issues, mostly maybe having to do with pollution, either air or water. Wildfires is different in a way, and especially when you factor in climate change and the fact that we think this is going to be increasing. Is there anything we can do to help these communities, at least on that rebuilding side? Because maybe we can't figure out how to solve all the problems with Mother Nature, but what can we do?
So many of my colleagues, we work with a network called the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, and we talk about what does it mean for a community to be adapted to fire. And that relates to both how do communities respond to prepare for a fire beforehand, how do they respond in the moment, and then how do we set up for recovery after a disturbance like fire. And one of the things that, again, we found in this study was that, communities which have lower adaptive capacity because of the resources that have been provided, the factors that they face related, again, to demographics, housing, transportation, language, education, socioeconomic status, they're particularly vulnerable, and that they need to be central to our society's planning and response to the fire disasters. I think too often we look at only from the fire side of the equation. We need to be looking at the community side of the equation just as much.
And you talk about the community side of the equation. Also, when it comes to what is causing these wildfires. So we've heard politicians, whether President Trump or Governor Gavin Newsom, talk about mismanagement of the forest as possibly being a reason. We've also obviously talked about climate change. From your standpoint, what do you think can best help prevent these wildfires?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. And I would say that we need to be addressing wildfires and a response to wildfires at all levels, at national, state, and local levels. This includes needing to take action to limit climate change, which is driving longer, drier fire seasons. And we're seeing the devastating consequences of that this year. It does include addressing forest management and recognizing that for many of our Western forest ecosystems that I've spent many years studying, fire is inevitable and is a natural part of these forests, and that we need to find ways to safely put fire back into our forests. And again, building on the study, it also means that we need to address how we prepare and invest in our communities so that a natural process like fire does not become a disaster for those who live in our communities.